In this episode, I am once again joined by Alan Chapman, British writer, occultist, and spiritual teacher. Alan takes a deep dive into his understanding of the phenomenon of prophecy, how it operates, and its surprising purpose. Alan explains the difference between prophecy and prediction, reveals the tests a prophet will face, and contrasts his approach to that of the Old Testament prophets. Alan also shares stories of his own prophetic experiences, including a prophecy which he believes concerns events to come in 2026. So without further ado, Alan Chapman. Alan, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me once again, Steve.
And you're on the boat.
Yes, you've kindly invited me into your home to do this interview.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Very nice indeed.
Yep.
And we've got a really interesting topic to discuss today, and that is the topic of prophecy. And you've got a prophetic message to share.
Yes, I'm totally using you at the moment. Exploiting your reach.
Exploiting my reach?
Yes, yes.
Well, okay. So later on we will do that. You'll share that and we'll discuss it. But before that, we were just discussing before we began recording. It's a good idea probably to sort of situate that somehow with a discussion about prophecy per se in itself, and also your own history with prophecy, your own personal experience with prophecy. This is not the first prophetic message that you've received. So I wonder how we might begin with that. What is prophecy? What are we talking about here? One immediately thinks of the Old Testament prophets. Is that what we're talking about here? And so what is prophecy and what's your background in it?
Yeah, so I think it's good to distinguish prophecy from prediction in the first place. Prediction is noticing a pattern and then guessing where events might unfold such that they meet the pattern, right? And you do that by trusting appearances, by trusting the information that you have, your pattern recognition ability, that kind of a thing. And then you make a best guess, and then maybe it pays off or it doesn't, right? Prophecy is not of that nature, although sometimes prophecy is misconstrued as prediction. And then sometimes they're blurred together if the person conveying the message that's genuinely prophetic messes up their job, like does a bad job of what it is that they're supposed to do. So in terms of what prophecy actually is, I think it probably has greater breadth and depth than most people assume, particularly if we have the caricature of prediction as our idea of what prophecy is or should be. So prophecy really means to put into words or to speak on behalf of something else, and that something else traditionally is the divine. But I think if we recontextualize it from the traditional stories of prophets and that kind of a thing into what many of you might be familiar with, which is the path of awakening or the pursuit of awakening, I think it might make more concrete sense in terms of people's own experience of the structure that I'm talking about. So the first step in what I teach in Magia is to distinguish between the notion of two worlds. The first world being a world of appearances, which is the one that we're all familiar with, and the voice of that world and what it would like to persuade you is the truth, which is we have a beginning and an end. Like we've appeared out of nowhere, we have a short duration or lifespan, and at some point there will be a termination of that. Like we come from nothing, we're a something, part of an everything, and then eventually we'll be nothing again. And there is also a strong element there with appearances that there is nothing else beyond that, right? However, when it comes to an authentic engagement with what we call waking up or spiritual seeking or something like that, there's something that comes prior to the appearances, something that doesn't have the same nature as appearances, and is indeed contrary in terms of the direction, or what can we say, in terms of the promise, right, of what it would like to the promise that is contrary to the nature of this world, that it would more than anything like you to say yes to in terms of an inheritance, right? So I pause there because it's worth emphasizing that there is an expression of love in this sense that we carry around in ourselves that tells us that there's something contrary to this world, or something that is not dependent on appearances, and that is a promise of something else that you know to somehow you know that it exists, but at the same time it's also too good to be true, right? And so sometimes we back away from that feeling, but what it is that comes prior is what we describe as a silent knowing, like it's something that you know to be the case even though you never encountered it in the world of appearances. It's something that you say yes to that's contrary to appearances, and often presents itself in terms of a test, in the sense of, do you listen to the voice of this world or do you listen to this other voice? And you lack the words to describe what it is that you might be looking for, what you've said yes to, but somehow nevertheless you know it to be the case, right? So it's despite having the words for it that we say yes to it, and then we follow it. This silent knowing is something we carry around inside ourselves, in our hearts, and it comes before everything else. It's the reason why we end up being seekers, why we might seek out a teacher or a teaching or a practice before we learn any of the words or the ways of expressing what it is that we're looking for. That has to be there organically as the drive behind the path. And now we're approaching what is meant by prophetic, when I'm using the term in a technical sense. Prophetic means to put something into words. So the extent to which you in your own experience have sought practices or instruction, or perhaps even yourself, you've tried to explain where you find yourself and what it is that you're looking for. All of this can be understood as putting something into words that is itself silent. Right, so the creation of speech or an expression, and that's what all practices and teachings and traditions are. The silence comes first, that other nature comes first, and then how we express our participation in that nature is secondary. Right, so the other world comes first, and this one comes after. Or saying yes to this silent knowing comes first, and then our best attempt at practice and articulating what it is that we're seeking is secondary, comes after. And this is what is meant by prophetic speech in a very basic sense. It means to speak on behalf of. To speak on behalf of that nature means that nature remains silent, right? And speech remains speech, but one is found through the other, right? And this is what creation is, and this is what the mystery is of what it means to be a human being, is that we participate in this process. So, did all of that make sense?
So far.
What I've said? Yeah? Yes. So, to speak on behalf of. Now, there are confounding factors, right? We have false expectations, prior learning, we have cases of mistaken identity that we make, such that in this process of following this silent knowing and engaging with it consciously with our practice, we get it the wrong way around and upside down, right? And we have our own, what can we say, vested interests that might conflict with saying yes to and honouring that silence, right? So this then lends itself to the more traditional understanding of or rather the archetype of what a prophet is, because we see in the Old Testament, don't we, countless examples of prophets who say yes to this other voice, the voice of the divine that they carry around inside themselves, to put into words this conscious participation in the nature of God, but they wrestle with it. They wrestle with it. So what is put into words, or what is encountered, right, can seem counterintuitive to themselves, goes against their own preferences, certainly puts them at odds with their own society and people, because people en masse listen to the voice of this world, follow appearances. So by definition, if you're listening to something else or serving something else, it's going to put you in a tricky or difficult situation, right? Now I'll bring in another element here, which is, yes, there is the question of thinking about your own nature and your own identity and who and what you really are and how you might be interested in that. And initially it's fine to think of it in that way. And I think most of the online culture about awakening is stays within that domain. Doesn't really seem to leave the confines of what we might call self-interest when it comes to awakening. So we want to realize our own nature, don't we? We want to be free from our own delusion. It may not be for everyone, but I can take care of myself. Or perhaps, you end up with inflation when it comes to awakening, and you have some kind of revolutionary social project and you want everyone else to wake up as well, something like that. But this is a very sanitized or denuded version of or account of what waking up is, because there is more than one awakening, and eventually you reach a place where awakening and delusion are something that you leave behind. But with the increasing depth of one's experience on the path, the kind of things that you encounter or experience isn't merely a case of enjoying some kind of unconditional state of bliss or some nebulous field of consciousness or something like that. There is a preponderance of spiritual phenomena that doesn't easily fit within the confines of what passes for, let's say, neuroscientific interest in what awakening is, or non-duality, and certainly not even in most of the conversation around non-duality, particularly like with pure Advaita attempts at putting into words what this path is. So what I'm talking about is things like having visions of future events, or even more challenging might be the notion of being tasked with expressing something that has been directly shown to you, right? That has its origin in this other world or in the divine, right? And that it's in service to that principle, to the divine, that your job is to convey exactly what it is that you've seen or heard, right, for the benefit of the people within whom you find yourself, like the community or the society or something like that. Again, there are traditional models for understanding this, going all the way back to the Presocratics. But nevertheless, this is much more common than I think people might believe it to be, along with other stuff as well that's not prophecy, such as remembering past lives, encounters with entities, with spirits, and so on. I mean, there's many accounts of famous non-duality teachers who sanitize their own stories when it comes to their awakening and that kind of a thing, because some of these things might seem like they're too challenging or something like that. But if I was to summarize everything that I've just said, for the sake of clarity with the audience, is prophecy is the same. It's the same principle as you doing your practice. You've said yes to something else, you wish to consciously put it into words, and that's what practice is, and it allows you to participate in its nature to a greater extent, and they feed back on each other. And it starts off small, but as the path progresses and your circle widens, eventually it includes more people, but then it also becomes possible through your own development for a more direct form of communication, where something is put into words, where you can speak on behalf of that nature, and where explicitly your task is not to change what's been said, what you've seen, or tamper with it because of your own personal preferences, right, and your own drama around what the message, the nature of the message might be and what its function is. So shall I pause there as a
Yeah. So that's something about what prophecy is.
Yeah.
And I've got some questions about it, but actually something that comes to my mind is to ask the question, what prophecy isn't? Because you've already said there's this conflation between prophecy and prediction. But also I'm thinking of ways in which prophecy is used. Some people will say, for example, a musician or songwriter is a kind of prophet, the voice of a generation, that sort of thing. Bob Dylan or this kind of people.
Yeah.
And that there's implication, and I know a lot of songwriters feel this way, that they're tapping into something else. It comes through them, and they catch the muse, and it comes through. That's actually surprisingly common among songwriters, and so they're seen, I think, culturally, aren't they, as maybe messengers of that something else, or they can be elevated to that point. But is that right or not? Also, I think perhaps writers or filmmakers might be seen sometimes in that kind of a way. George Orwell, for example, is sometimes called prophetic. Now, of course, there they mean predictive.
Yeah.
Right? So what's the difference there? Are there distinctions, rather, we can draw out from these common colloquial uses of this prophetic category?
Yeah, I mean, I as someone who dabbles with songwriting, right, and you are also a musician, yeah, so you know about this, and I think this is true for other professions as well, like writing or anything artistic or creative, and I won't say too much about this because it might be too much of a digression. There is a lot of romanticizing when it comes to artistic creation, and if you do it for long enough, eventually you have to move past the idea of being divinely inspired or waiting for inspiration or something of that nature, before you let's say you write a song or a novel or whatever it might be. And the sad reality is actually it's just about discipline, about consistency and turning up and then doing the work. So I'm leaning back from the romanticism of the artist. However, all of that being said, for those artists that are well, let me come back to a phrase that I use a lot, and that is allowing something to disclose its own nature. Right, so the path of awakening can be thought of as you allowing your own nature to disclose itself and not getting in the way in terms of your preferences. But this can be true about genuine artistic expression. So if you were interested in exploring the unconscious, let's say, or you took your inspiration from that direction, allowing it to disclose its own nature, which also ties in with the idea of, if you have a creative idea, allowing that idea to disclose its own nature tends to produce the best kind of art, not only because it speaks to us in a deep way, like through the unconscious, but it can also have that prophetic quality in the sense of predicting circumstances, because of the fact that events, they begin inside us in the first place before then being manifest in the world. So someone who has the simple task of listening to the unconscious or listening to an idea, allowing it to disclose its own nature, serves a function in that regard. I'm thinking of someone like David Lynch. There is a what can I say? There is, of course, there might be a qualitative difference in terms of the explicit role of speaking on behalf of the divine. There's a great degree of consciousness there, isn't there? In terms of the expression. Yes. So I think that accounts for most of what we think of as prophetic, if we take out the predictive, which is merely seeing a pattern and then seeing where it might go, which isn't without its own power, in its own place. But then, of course, we have within artists and cultural influencers, if that's the right term, people who are actually prophets. So I'm thinking of someone like Philip K. Dick, who in his famous speech in Paris explicitly says he has to take up the role of the prophet to convey what it is that he's seen, right, without changing it. right? Because it's what he's supposed to say. So that is what can I say? That's also there. That's in the mix. You know, an artist who is also explicitly taking up the task of speaking on behalf of something that person considers to be divine.
Sometimes I think with singer-songwriters, the word prophet is used. If we think of prophecy as speaking on behalf of something else, people say the voice of a generation, you know, the voice of a revolution, or whatever. They're speaking on behalf maybe of, not of the divine exactly, but of group sentiment, or some sort of social commentary or criticism or something that's going on, like criticizing the Vietnam War, for example. Sometimes that's seen as prophetic because it's got this sense of speaking, to use that cliche, truth to power, you know, coming in from the desert, that feeling, and going before the king and saying, stop invading Vietnam, that sort of thing. And but it's not clear to me that that's necessarily the same thing as speaking on behalf of the divine.
Well,
is there a distinction there?
I think you've hit on something that is essential to the nature of prophecy, which has taken me a while to realize. So maybe I should talk about past experience with prophecy to explain what I mean, because I think that's this idea of speaking truth to power might not be the best articulation of what is that I'm going to touch on, but nevertheless there's some truth to that that's essential to that role. So back in, I think it was January of 2011, I had a dream, and in the dream I could see an island or some isles, right? I could see an island, and to keep it brief, there was a nuclear explosion, and in the dream I wait for the blast from the nuclear explosion, but it never comes. So there is a nuclear explosion, but there's no blast, right? And I woke up from that dream, and it had that sense that all significant dreams have, which is, you know, this is something to pay attention to. But I had no idea what it meant. What kind of a nuclear blast has no blast? Like, what does that mean? I didn't quite recognise the island, but I thought it could be Britain. It could be Britain. So I thought, if this is a prophetic dream, then maybe I should try and find out, you know, what its nature is, and want more information. And this is the first thing that always happens whenever you experience something prophetic, which is you want to figure it out straight away, right? It's kind of like this knee-jerk reaction to possess it. You want to figure it out, and then you can possess it. And that's the classic way of falling from it. It's how you lose it, by trying to figure it out. But nevertheless, it's there, and being a human being, I mean, this is your natural inclination, right? Particularly if you find what you've seen to be alarming. So I live in Britain. Is there going to be a nuclear explosion in Britain? Right, so there's some sense of alarm about that. I remember asking some students at the time. I shared the dream, and they went off and did some scrying, right, some visionary work, to see if they could see, you know, or gain more information about what it was that I dreamt about. And independently, both of them reported seeing something like swirling liquid with lots of bits or wood or debris like floating in the liquid, swirling around. It was dark, and I thought, what's that supposed to mean? Like, I cannot see in any way how that's related to the dream that I had. And then, of course, a month or two after I had the dream, Fukushima happened in Japan. So, I mean, as everyone knows, there was a tsunami, and this caused a failure in the nuclear plant at Fukushima. There was a nuclear blast without there being a nuclear blast. It was nuclear radiation. It was a nuclear disaster. The island, of course, was Japan. Now, at the time, and like the images that the students had seen, that was swirling dark water, of course, that's we saw that on our TV screens when the event was reported. I remember at the time thinking, what was the point of the dream? what is the point of something that only really makes sense once the event has happened? Right? Why give you foreknowledge of something that you'll only understand once the event has happened? What's the point of that? Because our default mode is to think about prediction, and therefore to change our course of action informed by that prediction, right? So, was I supposed to I don't know, phone up? Is it TEPCO, the institution responsible for maintaining the nuclear power plant at Fukushima, and say, listen, I've had this dream, and I think a disaster is going to happen. But what's the value of it? And I chalked it down to just another interesting prophetic experience. Now, I should mention that before I'd had this dream, I'd done some magical work with a friend of mine, Duncan Barford, where we spoke to an enlightened being, let's put it that way, using magic, and we were given some you might call them predictions, but it's prophecy. So I was told where I would be and who I would meet when I would experience awakening, which I'd been chasing, intensely and consciously for about 3.5 years, leading up to 2009. And I was even given, the geographical coordinates for where I would be at the beginning and end of my journey. Again, immediately trying to work out what it is that I've been told and what it means, but it only really making sense once the events have happened. So I was kind of familiar with that dynamic. But why? That's very different, isn't it, from seeing a disaster? Right, what's the virtue of seeing a disaster in a dream? And you might think, well, one of the options is that it's just a curious psychic mechanism that humans have. Perhaps it's the way that time works, so it's no more, meaningful than water running downhill. Like it's some people tend to pick up things that might happen in time that hasn't happened yet. Perhaps it's something to do with the psychic disturbance, the trauma that's involved, something like that, and there's no more meaning to it other than that. I don't believe that to be true. So here's an interesting fact about what happened at Fukushima. It's worth noting that in my dream, I didn't dream about an earthquake, and I didn't dream about tsunami. I dreamt about a nuclear explosion. Right. Now, what sets that apart from a natural disaster is that the nuclear disaster was man-made. It was man-made, not just in the sense that humans built a nuclear power plant, but in the sense that for 10 years leading up to the disaster, TEPCO and the other institutions responsible for maintaining that site were repeatedly warned that a tsunami would cause the site to fail and that there would be a disaster. They actually modelled, they did some modelling to predict the possible size of tsunamis, and I think it was 2 years, I think it was in 2009, 2 years before, they actually predicted the size of tsunami that actually occurred beforehand. And it was found that the problem with why no one took any precautions was the fact that there was regulatory capture through a network of corruption and nepotism and collusion, right? So that they were warned years and years and years ahead of the disaster, and then the disaster happens. A disaster that could have been avoided had humans taken responsibility for what it is they should take responsibility for. So there's a clear distinction, right? It's not about, that dream was not about a natural disaster happening and therefore we should save ourselves. It was, look at the consequences of our collective decisions, right? This is what will happen as a result of those decisions, and it's not wanted for us. But look, this is the outcome. It took me a while to come to understand that, and what led to me coming to understand that is another vision that I've had, which was 6 years ago. Before I launch into that, is there anything you want to ask? Or
so the distinction between prophecy and prediction is not that one sees the future, because prophecy can do that too. It's the means of seeing it. So prediction, you're using observable patterns, and prophecy, you're receiving from some other place, it seems.
Yeah.
The prediction of the future. Is that the distinction between the two of them? So
there's the question of the origin of the prediction, right? Does it come from this world? Mm. So is the person who's whether you call it prophecy or prediction, ask yourself when someone suggests something that's going to happen, what are they trusting? Are they trusting appearances? Is it something that they've figured out? Is it a best guess? Is it informed by recognizing patterns? Superstition, opinions, cutting edge theories. Like, what is it that they're trusting? Prophecy proper that I'm talking about doesn't come from appearances. It comes from something else. And that something else is a nature that you participate in, right? And the words come after. It's put into words, right? So it has a different origin. And then touching on that idea of speaking truth to power, if you remember, you brought that up. I believe that the content of prophecy, when it comes to pointing out disaster, if it's coming from silence, if it's coming from this other state of consciousness, if it's coming from the divine, the content has this quality of how a parent might relate to a child who is acting in a way that will lead to a bad outcome, right? So look at the collective decisions that's being made, the failure in taking responsibility. This is going to be the fruit of that behavior, right? It's not wanted for you. Like, you shouldn't do that. That's not a thing that you should do. However, it's too late. Like, this is now going to be the outcome, right? So there is a sense of divine mercy about these kind of encounters or experiences, which is the divine's there with you in that, but it's not wanted for you, right? And so speaking to that notion of collective failure, right? Or because here's the thing, you see, you can look at a failure like Fukushima and say it was the person who was in charge, that's the person that's at fault, or it's this engineer over here who didn't do so and so, or this corrupt individual. But it takes some time, and it takes a culture, and it takes a collective kind of unconsciousness. I say unconsciousness. There is a type of unconsciousness there, but let me make this as clear as possible. The corruption and the failure was consciously committed en masse, right? As a general cultural movement, we could put it that way, but certainly through the institutions in the society, and it's us as people that allows that to happen. Even if it's just by little steps or little degrees, the extent that we've gone along with it is the extent to which we've enabled it, and we've moved in that direction. I say consciously, right? So if I know that if I know that if I ignore, let's say, safety concerns, the job that I should be fulfilling, my responsibility, if I ignore that, I know I'll get a larger salary, when I move on from this position to another one. That's done consciously. This is consciously done. So when it comes to, I know I've only cited one example, I'll get onto another one now, but the nature of prophecy isn't about just some random disaster happening, right? Nor is it about people collectively doing things because everyone's just asleep, and have no say in it. It's always about conscious collective decisions in a direction that's repeated many times that then leads to an unavoidable outcome that is not wanted for us. And simply being informed of that means that when an event of that nature does happen, it changes your relationship to the event, right? It makes the event conscious. It makes the nature of this place conscious. It makes our participation in what's led to that outcome conscious, right? Perhaps in such a way that the trauma of the event, or something like that, which otherwise might point us in a bad direction, right? That perhaps having heard the prophecy and then encountering the event, we can keep our eyes up, right? That we recognize, no, there is another world. And how do I know? Because I was told about it. And not only was I told about it, but it's not wanted for us, right? Again, it's back to this promise of something that belongs to us, that's an inheritance that we have, should we say yes to it, and it's possible for us. So, shall I move on to the example that I wanted to talk about?
Well, let me ask one or two more questions about it. So, you're talking here about prophecy as having a predictive element, although you may not always recognize what it's predicting until it's happened. And so, and you describe the outcome as inevitable.
Yeah.
And the purpose of it then of the prophecy is to, when that happens, to contextualize it in such a way that you turn towards the divine rather than turning, into confusion and chaos and this sort of stuff, at least inside of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that maps in some ways to what I think of in Old Testament prophets, but not completely, because there's this sense, isn't there, of a call to repentance that the Old Testament prophets will sometimes say. They'll say, Israel, you've got to turn away from what you're doing, or you're going to get smited.
Yeah.
And then here come and they don't turn away, and then here come the Babylonians. But there's a sort of implication there, or maybe it's not really, maybe it's not there, but there's an implication that if the nation of Israel in the Old Testament had repented, then maybe they wouldn't have been smited, right? Is that? But it sounds like you're saying that prophecy, in the way you understand it, it can't be avoided. It's not repent or this will happen. It's here it comes. I'm going to be with you in it. Turn towards the divine through it. This sort of thing.
Yeah, I would say that there's truth to what you've just expressed, but I think its expression is unfortunate with some of the terms. So
please,
yes,
tear to shreds.
Yeah. So my experience of the divine or God only involves an expression of love. That's it. Ideal, right? Infinite patience, understanding, and care. I mean, you could. We are the thought of love in the mind of God. That's what the nature of creation is. There is no sense in God of retribution, or of punishment, or of smiting, right? Or jealousy, or anger, or any of these things. It doesn't exist. It's not a thing. Now, there is a shadow of God, right, that you can encounter on the path, and you will encounter on the path, that you could say exhibits this some of these qualities, but that's precisely because it's a shadow and has no being of its own, and we have to travel through those shadows to see what the truth might be. I mean, that's a more what can I say, technical consideration. I'm going back to what I said before, which is it's more like a parent and a child, right? A parent that smites a child because it misbehaves is a terrible parent, is an awful parent. A parent that wants the child to fear them, right, is a psychopathic parent, right, by definition. If you have children, what you discover is that you want the best for them. However, they will consciously make choices that will lead, and it could lead to a bad outcome, right? Not catastrophic, not necessarily catastrophic, but nevertheless. And what do you want to do? You don't want the bad outcome for them. That's why you try and make conscious what it is that's happening, what it is they've decided to do, right, and why it will lead to something bad. Now, you can do this thing that sometimes people do, which is you look at the Old Testament and you interpret God being angry and smiting and so on as actually just the way reality lays itself out. As in, if you're told that you shouldn't touch a hot stove and you touch it and then you burn your fingers, that's God smiting you in the sense that it's just the way reality works, right? So you get told not to do it, but you do it, so you break the law, right? And then there's a consequence. Sometimes people do that. But this is why, if you're going to do that, then do that. But I think you should remove the language around the smiting and the sense of revenge or anger or wrath, right? So it's always either an expression of love in the sense of the taking joy in finding your own nature in the other. That's when we can think about a parent and a child, right? That's God and the soul. The joy of yourself found in the other, right? There's one way of thinking about that, and that is what I would say is similar to having a prophecy that the thing that you've been searching for, the awakening that you've been looking for, it is going to happen. It's yours because you've said yes to it, and it will happen regardless, right? It's miraculous and too good to be true. Nevertheless, here it is. But then there is the other side of being a parent, which we might say is affording freedom to a child to make decisions. You want to help them be conscious, but you want them to grow in the way that you did, right? So that they are they're a person in the way that you are. That the love is genuine. I mean, it's what the nature of love is. And therefore there is this element of mercy, right? Or this element of compassion, which is to see someone make mistakes, to try and help them as much as possible, but honouring the fact that they have the dignity of their own consciousness in the sense that they can choose the path that they're going to walk down, right? And that you're going to say, I don't want this for you, right? And please, I wish you would listen to me. And you're getting this wrong. You're suffering with this. You have this burden. You don't need it, right? It's a mistake. And that's what you do as a parent. That's what you can do, right? So that expression of mercy, this is more readily understood as the goddess, as Sophia, sometimes expressed in other ways, but it's that aspect of the divine that's with us in our damnation, in the playing out of our shadows, in pursuing those shadows consciously, and the detrimental outcome to doing so. And she's with us. She'll be with us, right, and doesn't abandon us, right? That's the nature of what divine mercy is. Something that humans can't do. But that's what the goddess does. And that's the nature of these events that I'm talking about. They have this aspect of mercy to them, right? So, yes, there is the you can see, can't you? There's this thread which is true, which is saying to usually the people in power, right, but the institutions, to your culture, to your people, collectively we're making a mistake, right? I've been told to tell you this, look, and this is what the outcome is going to be. It's not wanted for us. True, but the outcome is not, okay, now you're being punished because you've broke the rules. There's no sense of that. It's merely this is what your nature is, and if you behave in this way, this is what the outcome will be. And it's not wanted for you. Instead, there's this promise of something else, something that's miraculous. And it's the converging of what's realized by saying yes to that inheritance with this world that will transform this world. That's the promise of the path.
So is it an essential property of prophecy that it can't be changed? In other words, I take your point about the smiting and changing the thought of that. But the other aspect of what I was asking was, it seems at least implied in the model of the Old Testament, which I only draw upon because I'm more familiar with it. I'm not necessarily saying it's the best model, but that if here's a prophecy, change your ways or bad things will happen, and there's an implication that the bad thing can be avoided if you change your ways. Yeah. But I'm hearing you talking about using the word inevitable and so on. Yeah. That this is not about a warning to change your ways. It's actually about a heads up that something's coming. Yeah. And a kind of recontextualizing of that so that it can, in a sense, deepen your relationship with the divine rather than cast you into all kinds of confusion and horrible things.
Yes.
Something along those lines. So is it a central property that it's inevitable? Yeah. Is that a difference in those two ideas of prophecy?
Yeah, that's a crucial difference. When it comes to awakening, we can understand it being inevitable in the sense that these two worlds that I've talked about, one world of time, the other world is the world of eternity, right? It's always the case, it's always true. When we have an awakening, that's the invasion of eternity into time, right? It's found through its opposite here, through us as human beings that travel this path. Eternity is always the case. It's always true, right? So there is a way of thinking about how before we say yes to following this silent knowing that I've talked about, before we say yes to this other inheritance, it seems as if there's a test, that there is a choice to be made, right? I can either make the right choice or the wrong choice. I can listen to appearances or I can listen to something else that isn't appearances. There's a choice. And if you listen to appearances, if you get persuaded in that direction, then you can say you failed the test, right? You made a choice between two options and you went in the wrong direction. However, if you say yes to this silent knowing, to following this golden thread that leads you into the house of God, if you say yes to that, what happens is suddenly everything is inverted, in the sense that there never was a test. Every detail in your life now is suddenly the means of your liberation. In other words, just the unfolding of your eternal destiny. It was always the case. Everything is just so. It was meant to be that way. And the trajectory that you're on, the goal, if we think of awakening as a goal, is a done deal. It's a done deal. And there's another way of thinking about that, which is the fact that you can say yes to this other inheritance that you carry around inside yourself, the fact that you're conscious of it. You're only conscious of it because that thread is like a beam of light going back in time from where eternity punctures your life in the future. You can only say yes because you've already woken up in the future. That's why you can say yes in the first place, right? So a prophecy where you are shown, because it comes from the same origin as this nature that you've said yes to, right? You're trusting this nature, and it's the same nature that's telling you these things or showing you these things if you have the capacity. They show you that actually this awakening is going to occur here, the thing that you've been seeking. It's a done deal because it's because of the fact that it's the unfolding of your eternal destiny. It was always the case. It was always yours should you have said yes to it. You won't be forced to have that inheritance, but if you said yes to it, it was always true, because that's the nature of eternity. So there's an inevitability about it. On the flip side, when it comes to this failure in collective responsibility, where we consciously decide to listen to appearances, right, to go in the wrong direction, such that there is a disaster, through the lens of Magia, what I teach, the way to understand that requires a tiny little detour. So people will indulge me. It will make sense once I get to the conclusion. When human beings are born and we leave the womb, sometimes we assume that means that we've incarnated, right? But actually, incarnation continues, right, in such a way that we will have experiences when we're young where a deepening false conclusion about who and what we are, drawn from impressions made in this world, right, will be gathered up, if you like, over the course of our childhood and sometimes our teenage years, and that forms an identity, a false identity that we have here, right? And these false conclusions, or these strong impressions that are made, they're usually made during rare occurrences with parents or someone else that we might look up to, where they demonstrate what really matters in the world, what's really the case. And this is why we pay attention with an open mind, and it's a non-verbal false conclusion that we draw about ourselves. And we can talk about these false conclusions or false ideas that we have about ourselves with the analogy of a shadow, because a shadow is the image of ourself, isn't it? Right, but it's a false image. It has no being of its own, but we animate it. Right, so this is how we pick up these shadows and we inhabit these shadows as our incarnation deepens as human beings, and they're passed down through the family lineage, usually, right? So everyone has themes to their shadows, right, that they will recognize in their own family emotional environment. Right? Families have their own emotional tone. You know, there's that sense that people outside the family won't understand what happens within the family, and so on. And it's like it is like a spiritual initiation into a tribe when these false transmissions happen. Right. So we collect these shadows, right, and we play out these shadows whenever we try and participate in an activity that we find to be personally meaningful. And at a certain point, you might become aware of the fact that the way that you behave makes no sense to you, that you don't want to behave that way anymore, that you need to do something about it, that this isn't the way things should be, and so on. And usually this is the beginning of being conscious of that silent knowing that I talked about, something prior, something that you know to be true even if you don't have the words for it, and it's contrary to this world, right? So you're looking for something else of a completely different nature. That then turns into the spiritual seeker, who will then to varying degrees of consciousness, depending upon the practice and the teachings and so on, and their own peculiarities of their path, they'll travel through these shadows, or encounter these shadows at least, on the path back to realizing who and what they really are, right? Who they were before they incarnated. That's what awakening is. But there are some people who don't do that, right? Instead, because these shadows are informed by a false belief about the nature of the world, which we can only describe as unjust, there can be a sense of a need for revenge or rebellion against the nature of the world, and that can feel self-righteous, right? And we can be seduced by the need for revenge, right? For smiting. We talked about anger, right? Because it seems justified. And we can choose appearances, we can lean into those shadows, and we can cultivate them. Now, everyone's familiar with the fruits of playing out these false beliefs or false identities that they have, right? Because it destroys what you care about. But you can cultivate that further if you lean into it in that direction. And this is a path of annihilation, a path of nihilism. There are many examples of it in the world. And there is given everything that I've just described, right, we will now consider that happening en masse with human beings, and we can appreciate that just as you have many shadows that mutually support each other, right, in terms of your own unconscious, your shadows also mutually support the shadows of the people in your family, and all the families taken together, all the lineages of this world, all mutually support each other in terms of a culture or civilization. And then you can see there is a question of how, to what extent has a culture consciously chosen to lean into that sense of injustice, right? To play out the need for revenge, inhabit the peculiarities of their own shadows, right? Knowing what the outcome will be. Not unconsciously, but consciously knowing what the outcome will be. Because the whole thing about revenge or self-righteousness is that I'm burning everything down, right? And it's justified, and that's the path that I've chosen. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be expressed explicitly as, hostility, right? But you can see, can't you, that if you decide to just look out for yourself, if you think it doesn't matter if there's a disaster, right? If I'm getting paid handsomely, right, a reward, right? And I know it's coming through a corrupt network. That's informed by the same dynamic, right? It's informed by believing appearances. This is the only world that there is. It's important that my life is supported by the sacrifice of others. That's essentially what it means. And collectively then, it takes some time, right? It takes some conscious cultivation before a disaster, like what I described with Fukushima, or the thing that I'm going to describe, becomes an inevitability. But it's inevitable because it's all of these things together have it's already been set in motion. Right, so there's another way of putting this, which is slightly different, which is I talked about what it means to incarnate deeper as a human being. We can think of civilization or culture as incarnating, right? What are we incarnating? What culture are we bringing here? Right, what are we manifesting? And I said that events begin inside us first before appearing outside. And this is how it is with prophecies of the nature of a disaster that's the result of a failure, a conscious failure, culturally speaking, which is, it's now inevitable, right? So you can see it if you are so inclined, you're going to encounter it inside yourself first. That's why it's possible, and then it's going to manifest in the world. So I'd say that's that's why, if we were going to say good news or bad news, that's why there's an inevitability to both of them, right? But even with the bad news, this is an important aspect of it, which is there is still the message that listen, there's good news. This isn't wanted for you. This isn't how it should be. Right, there's a promise of something else. Yeah, even though it's even though that love has to bear a terrible message, right? It's still an expression of love.
It's still an invitation into some sort of relationship.
Yeah.
Would you like some more water? Before we move on then to, actually we'll just cut this bit. Diddly-doo. Right. Before we move on then to what it is you're going to bring, what about the Fukushima then prophecy that you had? What was the test there? How did you receiving that draw you, recontextualize that event to draw you closer to the divine somehow? I'm picking up some of the threads that we say are characteristic of prophecy in your way of thinking about it.
Well, it's basically everything that I've just talked about.
Specifically in
but
this case.
It left me in a state of confusion. So it's what is the point of such a dream, right? What is its nature? And it was only really wrestling with this this more recent vision and what it means and what I'm supposed to do, right? That it caused me to reflect on that prior experience in such a way that there's a reorientation, that I can understand what my orientation is supposed to be. Yes. And what our orientation is supposed to be, because there's nothing hidden about its nature. Like again, going back to the phrase, allow it to disclose its own nature. What is it? In terms of the dream, it's not a natural disaster that I'm being told about. I'm being shown a human-made disaster. How did it reach me? It had to come through a dream. It had to come through a dream. Now, there is there's something to be said now about the nature of prophecy. That there is a question around the available means of manifestation. Right. So, it may be that the only way that I can reach you is that I have to give you a dream to show you what's going to happen. However, if there has been enough work done, right, enough progress or growth, it could become possible that now dreams aren't required. Now you can just see a vision. Communication can be more direct. And it also brings up this based on that. I talked about how the virtue of the prophecy is in knowing it beforehand, so that when the event happens, there is this additional information. We could put it that way, and it changes your orientation to the event, or it allows for a more conscious or greater understanding of the nature of the event that you might miss otherwise. However, what if it was possible that the reason why we only think that, or rather, the only reason why that might be the best that we can do, is because we are now culturally so poor at taking this stuff seriously, right? That there is the absence of the required kind of institution and training that would make prediction, right, more plausible.
Right. Some sort of oracular institution.
So yes. So of course there's many examples of this in the ancient world. It was how society operated. Yeah. You would go and see the oracle before doing anything, right? They would make prophecies that, typically the cliche is you'd get the prophecy and then get it the wrong way around. So it does come true, but you misunderstand it, and there's calamity as a result of your misunderstanding. But those oracles dried up and disappeared a long time ago. And I'm also aware that me saying this, it's am I contradicting what I said earlier about the function of prediction? But this is bringing in a human element, which is probably muddying the waters. But I'll talk more about that when I touch on the next event.
Shall we?
Yeah, sure. So, only recently this year, I'd caused to go back to my records, right, my journals, whatever, to see when the things I'm going to describe actually happened, and it was actually a surprise to me to see this, because I didn't take this on board at the time. But it turns out on the morning of the Great Conjunction in 2020, that's when Jupiter and Saturn were in conjunction in the sky. Don't know if you remember it. In the winter of 2020, and I only notice it now as looking back that it was on that day. In the morning, I woke up from sleeping, and I was lying there in bed, and I was taken somewhere. Right, so I was in a different state of consciousness, entered a different state of consciousness, and there was the sense of, this is what you will see now, this is what you need to see. And what I saw was, I saw an American city, and the sun was setting, and there wasn't that much traffic on the road. And I notice in the distance that there is as the sky's getting darker, there's actually a band of black cloud on the horizon, and almost immediately upon noticing it, it completely engulfs the city, and I see a woman crouching by a car, screaming. There's lots of noise, and there is what I can only describe as something that looks like ash, right? Say volcanic ash or fallout or something like that. But when I think about it, it's the nature of that which it can only be, the thing that I saw could only be created by stuff being drawn up into the air and falling back down again, right? So I'm trying to be very precise about what I saw. I didn't see a volcano, right? I didn't see an explosion. I just saw that it was sudden. The woman's crouching by the car. There's this stuff falling out of the sky, and I had the briefest taste of an emotional state, which was traumatic. And it was very slight, and it was like being allowed to feel it, so I know its nature, but not enough that it would negatively affect me. And so I saw that. That's what I saw, right? And after that, I thought, the next day, I thought, I sketched it out or whatever, and I thought, now what is that? Like, why am I supposed to see that? What does it mean? Now there's an ambiguity. It's, is this all symbolic, right? Or is it a literal presentation? So when I say symbolic, the city looked like an idealized version of an American city. The sun is setting. So like, is this the sun setting on the American way of life? Is that what I'm being shown? That when the American empire collapses, it will be sudden and it will be traumatic, and then you have to deal with the fallout. See, I'm completely making it into a symbolic interpretation. Or is it a concrete event? Is this city a particular city, right? Is the fallout the result of an explosion? And therefore there is a I can be talking about a concrete event that isn't more broadly speaking, the collapse of America. Now, curiously, because I had reached this position with it, and I sat on it and did nothing with it. I thought, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it, so I'm going to allow it to disclose its own nature, right? I'm not going to do anything with it. And then this is a surprise to me, but it was 3 years later that I was completing a podcast series with my friend Duncan Barford, and we were doing 10 episodes for this season, and we'd done 9, and it was approaching we were about to record the 10th. And I had this curious experience where I was sat in my living room, and through the window, the full moon appeared through the window, and then I was in a different state of mind again, and I then knew directly, and it was the strangest. It was the strangest thing. It was like remembering that I always knew it was a specific city. Like I knew at the time 3 years before, but somehow didn't know it, right? So that unfolded in my consciousness, and it was New York. It's actually about New York as a city. There was this sense of that divine mercy, like this isn't wanted for us. It's hard to explain. It's love, but it's like heartbreaking because it's not wanted for us. And then there were elements to it that I haven't described before, which I will momentarily, but I knew through that experience that I was now supposed to speak about it, the vision that I'd had 3 years prior, and that the podcast series had been leading to me sharing it. So I shared it on that podcast episode.
Warp FM.
Warp FM, yes.
Still available.
Yes. But where are we at with it? Where we're at is, I think this is a concrete event that will happen. It could absolutely be also the same as the end of the American way of life, right? It's not the case that these things have to be separate. But we're talking about an actual event that will happen. But when will it happen? Right, so as I've already mentioned with prophecy, it's not a question of me figuring it out. I just need to convey what I've seen and do my best job, and not interpreting it or adding things that shouldn't be there. Right, so After sharing that on the podcast, so this was 3 years ago. It now transpires. Someone contacted me at the time, and they'd said that round about the time that I shared the story, I think it might have just been before, something like that. They themselves had a vision. They live in New York, and they had this vision of New York engulfed in flame, something like this, right? So, hearing me talk about this vision that I'd had 3 years prior, there was some resonance, right? So they reached out and mentioned it. But that was kind of the end of the conversation. A few months ago, this person contacted me again and said, "Have you had any more insight into what this event might be?" And it was because they'd experienced another vision, right? This time using a psychedelic, something like that, right? But what was interesting was there were details that I hadn't shared, that this person, when communicating what they'd seen, they had the same details, right? So there was this what can we say, confluence of confirming details, right? That has that sense of because these things are coming from different directions. Yeah, it's not a coincidence. But I'll just tell you what I saw, right, rather than this other person's vision, because I can't speak on behalf of what someone else has seen, right? The details that I didn't share, and the reason I was stepping back from these details because I wasn't quite sure what to make of them, because I know how it sounds. But this event with the moon, and I should add as well, that sense of divine mercy. This was the goddess, right? There was an element of being shown or seeing a building in New York being intentionally brought down. Now, if I say that to you, what do you think of?
The certain explanations for 9/11 that people put out there.
But whether it was intentionally brought down with the plane or it was some kind of false flag or whatever, either way, right, regardless, if you talk about a building coming down in New York,
that's what you think of.
Yeah, you think of 9/11. Yeah. There was this element there of it being intentional by the powers that be, right? So I know how that sounds, but the people who actually make the decisions in the world, there was this idea that it was like some sense of breaking the rules. Some rules have been broken, and therefore this is what will now happen, right? This is the decision. And this was in the location was Lower Manhattan. Now, I'm stepping back from that, or I was stepping back from that. But like the in terms of the symbolism, what is it, right? So if what I'm looking at is 9/11, the idea is that it's 9/11, right? But what I saw wasn't 9/11. In the sense that I didn't see planes flying into a building or whatever. It was just a building coming down. And so this is like 9/11 without being 9/11, because it's what you think of, isn't it? I mean, I remember when I shared the initial vision, it comes to mind like, well, there was a disaster in New York where something collapsed and it was sudden and it was traumatic and there was stuff in the air, although it was more like dust or whatever. It makes you think of it, doesn't it? Yeah. And what this makes me think of, right, is where I'm arriving at with what I'm sharing is it's got something to do with 9/11, and it will be intentional regardless of whoever does it, right? There's an intentionality to it. And it's been 6 years since the initial vision, which was on the Great Conjunction. It was 3 years after that I had the second experience, right? And now it's been another 3 years this fall, this autumn. Is it possible that the event in question will happen on the 11th of September this year? That's where I find myself, right? And that's what I'm pondering, whether that's the case. Now, there's a human element here, which is I don't, on the one hand, sharing what I've seen, right? I don't enjoy the idea that it will alarm people, right? I'd rather not be doing that. There is also, what can I say? But on the other hand, if I have this suspicion as a human, as a person, should I not share that suspicion with people? Because imagine if one could, right, that something like that does happen and I never mentioned it to anyone, right? Just as a human being, I don't know if I could live with myself, that I didn't say something, right? But everything that I'm saying now is not prophecy, and it may be the case that I'm completely failing by talking about this. This suspicion and this what can we say? It's almost like making a bet or taking a risk. Like, do you know what? If you can, don't be in New York on the 25th anniversary of 9/11 this year, right? Just to be safe. Because what have you got to lose, right? I'm not sure I'm supposed to be saying that. I'm not sure that's what my job is, but nevertheless, this is how things line up. Now, I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone else, but the details that I just mentioned about 9/11 this year, this was also contained in this other vision by this other person, along with the idea of it being intentional, which I hadn't told this person, and I have after having conversation and exploring what the person actually experienced, which is what I do with students all the time, right? You can identify what is a shadow, right? Because many things that we play out are actually how we misunderstand things, and it's like being told, this is what you're getting wrong, this is what you misunderstand, which means that you need a way of being able to identify that when it comes to spiritual experiences, because how do you know that what you're seeing isn't merely you being shown a shadow that you have, right? Versus something that has a different origin. Now, it wasn't extensive, but it was enough for me to at least think there's no reason for me to doubt what I know about what this person has shared, right? But the takeaway is it's coming from a different direction, and it's including details that I've not shared before, right? That are key to what the experience was. Now, there's another little esoteric aspect to this, which is in Magia, there's a way of understanding God as three persons in relationship to the soul. And the first is as the true God of eternity, Ion. And this has the nature of what I saw 6 years ago. I'm in a different state of mind, you can call that eternity, if you like, where I have this vision. God is also the goddess, the divine feminine, right? Who's with us in Hades, in the underworld. And this was the second experience that I had 3 years later. Almost like here's the expression in eternity, right? Here it is now, what it looks like in the world. And then the next step in this, if we can call it theology, right, the way that creation lays itself out, if we think of it in terms of personhood, right, God being a person, is that that Ion and Sophia, the god and the goddess, they then produce a child. And so I can't help but think, right, that 6 years ago I have the first vision, 3 years later I have the next one. It has these qualities to them of, like, say, let's say the father and the mother, something like that. And now it's been 3 years again, and it's lining up, like with all of the other details to point in this direction. That the birth of a child, that's another way of thinking about, a fruit, an outcome to an activity. And so all of these things together is the reason why I wanted to talk about prophecy, and specifically on your channel, because not only is it a suitable topic for the audience and your own interests and so on, but I was thinking about in terms of reach. Yeah, but again, I might be completely failing in terms of what I'm supposed to do. And there's an unfortunate thing here, which is when you share something of this nature with someone, it's like passing on the curse of, well, what do you do? What do you do? Do you run around like a headless chicken, telling everyone that you meet, listen, don't be in New York on 9/11 this year? Is that what you do? Like, how do you convince people that you care about? Well, some guy had a vision. Another guy took some drugs, and so therefore, let's all skip town for the day. It's like passing on a curse. I don't want to leave people like that. I want to make sure that there is a correct orientation, right? Because the point of the prophecy is not the prediction of the time of an event, and therefore the practical strategies you're supposed to employ. If you ask yourself the question, the person who's conveying this so-called prophecy, or prediction, or whatever it might be, right? What are they trusting? What do they trust? Are they trusting their best guesses? Have they been convinced? Is it a theoretical argument, right? Is it persuasion? Is it scientific evidence? Like, what is it that they're trusting? Is it appearances and so on? Or are they trusting something else, right? This silent knowing, this other nature. We can even say God, right? Are they trusting the divine? If the answer is yes, I think that's what they're trusting. They've been shown something, the nature of which we can understand, right? We can understand the origin of what I've talked about. Think of it this way. I'm shown something. Implicit in the experience is that this is not wanted for us. I'm allowed to taste the trauma, so I know what its nature is, but not enough for it to cause me any problems, right? That means whatever it is that's sharing this with me cares about my well-being. It cares about the direction that I'm going in. It cares about the direction we're all going in, to say to us, this isn't wanted for you, right? That's what I'm trusting. That's the only thing I'm interested in. I'm not interested in an idea of the divine that's about breaking rules and vengeance and smiting, and that you have to make sure you believe certain things and so on. As I mentioned before, fortunately, the divine is too good to be true, meaning who and what you are is too good to be true, but its nature is ideal. It only wants this miraculous destiny for us. That's it. And that's what I trust. That's the only thing I'm interested in. So, and this is the virtue of what a teacher should be. A teacher isn't someone that you should listen to trust their opinions about things. It should be, they should be an example of what it means to trust what you've decided to trust if you're going to wake up, which means, what does it look like to trust this silent knowing, or to trust the divine? What does that look like? Is that what this person is doing here? Right, well, if that person is doing that here, and that's what I'm doing, then I can see, I've got a model, I can see, you know, we can participate in the same process. If what I'm trusting is this nature that we can even also describe as divine self, capital S, right, God, if that's what I'm trusting, you can also trust that. You should be, if you're on this path authentically. That's what you already do trust. That's what you already are following. But that means that you're in contact with the same thing I'm in contact with, right? Do you trust that silent knowing? Do you trust that other voice? And if so, this is what my message would be. It would be trust that. Trust that in terms of the veracity of anything that I'm saying, because it's located in yourself just as it's located in me. So perhaps because I'm further down the path, perhaps I have a capacity to express certain things that wouldn't be possible otherwise. But that doesn't mean that even if you're a beginner, you don't have immediate contact with the same nature. And so turn to that, turn inward to that, and trust that, right, in light of what it is that I'm saying. Not the opinions of another human being. So this other voice is always available to you. So if you want to know if what I'm saying is true, you can turn to the origin of the thing that I'm communicating, and you can ask it directly. Right? You can be guided by that directly to the capacity that you're able to be, and that would be not only the orientation in terms of what you should do, you know, with it when it comes to what it is that I'm sharing, the information that I'm sharing, but it's also what's necessary for us not to lead to these bad outcomes in the first place. You know, a culture that's lost its orientation with the divine is more readily more likely to become corrupt, right, and to consciously cultivate these terrible disasters, these outcomes, you know, in the first place. But it means that when we do experience these traumatic events, when they do happen, it's precisely that orientation turning to something else that's required to make it through. Otherwise, you only have the voice of this world, and during a traumatic experience, that voice is nothing other than detrimental, and it will drive you into the ground in the opposite direction. So that's the if I've passed on a curse, I hope I've also passed on a blessing that goes with it, which is to keep that orientation in mind. And that's the best that I can do, you know, granted my possible failings in wanting to tell people, you know, perhaps on this day is when the event might happen. What do you think about that?
Gosh. Is there more to say?
I don't think so from my end. Except perhaps to say, just to tie these two things together, it was wrestling with this over the past year more intensely that forced me to allow it to disclose its own nature, meaning, okay, I'm going to pay attention to see what's actually there and what isn't there, right? Which then informed me in terms of what actually happened with the Fukushima event, right? So where I talked about, there's a commonality here, which is it's not about just terrible things happening to people. It's something that happens as a result of a corrupt society. That's what it is. The collective incarnation of a fate that's disastrous, that's not wanted for us. And that there is this sense of care, right? That it's an expression of love, that this isn't wanted for us. And that's what it's about. That's what it's about. And the remedy is this orientation more than anything else. That's what we need. So again, just coming back to it, you can see the parallels with what's there in the Old Testament, right? Even if the thunder and the lightning gloss is perhaps unfortunate.
When you said you may be failing, you mentioned previously that a prophet's job is to say what they saw.
Yeah.
And it's not really to try to penetrate the meaning or provide an interpretation. And presumably it's that aspect of what you've done today that you're uneasy about having done.
Yeah. Well, think of it this way. If I say to you, look, I think I'm trying to read this, right? And I think it's probably, I'm making a prediction. I think 9/11 this year, something could happen, right? It's all coulds, isn't it? It's all hedging your bet. It's all doubt, trust or doubt, right? If I say, look, just to be on the safe side, don't be in New York on 9/11 this year. What am I actually saying there? What I'm saying is, and this usually goes along with this kind of stuff, like, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Well, if the communication, and if I'm doing my job and I'm just communicating what I've seen, that's like saying, I hope what I'm trusting is incorrect. The thing that I'm trusting, that I've just been talking about, that is the only thing that I trust, the nature of the divine, I hope it's not what it appears to be. Like, I hope it's, or rather, I hope it isn't what I know it to be in reality. I hope it's not ideal. I hope it's flawed. I hope it's incorrect. I hope it's, I don't know, anything other than truthful, right? Which is an abominable thing to say. Like, it's what can I say? It's a betrayal, isn't it, of everything that you're supposed to be speaking on behalf of. What about this aspect to it? Talking about this, if it doesn't happen, there is the sense of credibility. Oh, look, another crazy person who's made a prediction about something that doesn't come true. Which puts you in the curious position then of hoping something terrible happens so that your credibility and your reputation remains intact. Which is also, an abomination. Also a terrible thing to entertain. But you can see, can't you, that the moment I veer from simply sharing what I've seen and I indulge how I feel as a person, like, it makes me squeamish, this whole thing. I'm supposed to say these things. I know that I'm supposed to share this with people. I'm supposed to do that. But it makes me very uncomfortable. I don't like the idea of alarming anyone. I don't like the idea of not saying anything, right? There's this desperation to want to say, look, just to be on the safe side, which is the complete, it turns everything upside down the wrong way around when I do that. But the truth of the matter is, right, that as human beings, that part of ourselves is always there, and it's supposed to be there. We just don't stay with it, right? There's something beyond it. We always have to move past those our own little drama and our preferences and the way that we turn things upside down the wrong way around. So as long as I'm conscious of that and other people are conscious of it, right, then I think it's okay.
Right. In other words, it's a different register, a different mode of speaking. Yeah,
it's the question is, to what extent am I indulging it? And it's the same test again, what am I listening to? Appearances, preferences as a human being, or something else?
So is sharing this your test?
There's always tests.
Oh.
There's always tests. The thing about the path is that the tests get bigger in scope. Right, the awakenings get more profound. The delusion gets more challenging. That's how it's supposed to be. But it gets more challenging and more difficult and wider in scope. But at the same time, it gets more frictionless because it's first of all, it's not the first time you've been through it, right? So maybe it takes a number of times for you to really pay attention. Right, and there are plenty of stories like that needing me to pay attention. But awakening facilitates such a thing. You know, it makes your consciousness a frictionless environment in this regard. So, which has its pros and cons. You know, in the middle of the path, you have a more frictionless consciousness, but that means that the shadows that do remain now have a more convenient environment within which to play themselves out. Right? And I think this is probably the basis for much of what passes for the nonsense described as crazy wisdom, or antisocial behaviour that has some kind of enlightened excuse.
Guru's gone bad, that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. That like there's some virtue in the edge that are now demonstrating to these shadows that you play out. You know, because you've had an awakening. Particularly if you think one awakening is enough and you're done, then you might think how you behave is now it's enlightened. You know, this is nonsense. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, slight digression.
At this point, I think we've got two options, and I'm not being prophetic, I'm being predictive, I suppose you could say. The first option is to finish now and leave that, if you want, obscured by what might follow, talking about other things. So that's one option, and we could certainly do that. The other option is I'm curious about, and this I think is a different topic, so we would need to bracket it, have a sense of your changing modes here. Maybe, I would imagine. If you have insights or thoughts or opinions, observations, more broadly about the systems that might be involved in what you've seen. And so here we'd be departing from your prophecy and also from really commenting on it, and we'd be talking more broadly. You talked about corrupt collusion of conscious action leading to bad outcomes, a sort of social, society-wide or cultural incarnation of a bad thing, that everyone or many people contribute to somehow or another. Do you have a sense of specifics about that? I mean, you gave a lot of specifics about Fukushima. Presumably you looked into it afterwards, and all these different companies and people involved. Do you have a sense of that in terms of the USA or Europe or UK or things like that? Do you have a sense of a reading on these things? And if you do, would talking about it now obscure what we've said? In which case we shouldn't talk about it. We should perhaps talk another time about it.
I mean, there are things that I could say that's pure opinion, right, based on geopolitics, events in the world, that kind of a thing. I mean, generally speaking, it's a cliche now, isn't it, that we've cut off our connection to the divine, our orientation to the divine, a long time ago. Collectively, a long time ago. And
when was that, do you think?
I mean, you can. There is the question of when do you start? If we think of our civilization as 2,500 years old, beginning with the Presocratics, by the time of Plato, it's already happening. Certainly Aristotle is an example of that, right? But there is then a deepening progression where, for example, originally there was this idea of a daemon, right, which is a divine self. We're the daemons. That's our divine identity, and we've fallen into this world and we need to return home. This is how it begins. By the time of Socrates, it's become a personal daemon that you have conversation with, and granted, part of the path, it will be experienced in that way, but it doesn't stay like that. One experiences union with its nature. That's how it's supposed to progress. by the time we get to Aristotle, no such thing exists. Right, there is no daemon. There are no other entities. There's no spirituality. There's nothing. There is, there's physics, and then there's everything else, which we might call metaphysics, which becomes something of a dirty word. Daemons, then, they're no longer a personal genius. Now daemons are just out there in the world. They're like spirits out there in the world. Of course, this is also a cliche. They become demons, don't they? The demons that are out there by the time Christianity becomes established. We can take that conversation about the daemon as a heuristic, like there's this progression that happens, and it's certainly the case that by the time a new cycle begins in our civilization, which we might say, around the 12th, 13th century, in Europe, Europe starts to come into its own, and then we end up with the Enlightenment. I mean, so much has been said about that. There's not that much to say now, really, is there? Apart from, God disappeared, the soul disappeared. We've got a mind and a brain. The mind's gone now. It's just the brain. It's this constant, descent into matter, if we want to, use a hackneyed term. We have. This is how Peter Kingsley put it. We've even forgotten that we've forgotten the divine. That's how far we've developed culturally. We've even forgotten that we've forgotten the divine, and that is I think that's demonstrated by our cultural view of, say, the Presocratics or Plato, right? The philosophers. We look back at them and we can only see them as people who had the beginnings of reason, sophisticated thought, and they're pondering about things. They have theories, and we can see them as precursors to theories that we have today, that are really just an artifact of the Enlightenment. The fact that they're actually, when you look at the Presocratics, that these were prophets, magicians, and healers who practiced magic and travelled to the underworld to receive divine law and prophecy that they're supposed to pass on to their people. I mean, that is that reality is what we've forgotten, and so we don't even know that we've forgotten it, because we look to the past and what we see ourselves, our own false light cast into the past, and it's like, oh look, Parmenides is a proto version of me, the enlightened liberal human being. I mean liberal in the philosophical sense. So we've forgotten that we've forgotten. That has consequences, so that there is there is the degree to which we individually and collectively express or put into words our participation in the divine nature that we all carry around inside ourselves. There's an extent to which we can then cultivate the fruits of moving in that direction. Right? If we don't have those institutions, if they've been rotted from the inside out, through various different reasons, right? But I mean, the reasons always come back to the same thing, which is it's the consequences of choosing appearance over reality, right? It's always the consequence of that. So when things get corrupted like a spiritual institution, it's because people they're pursuing the same petty things. Status, power, wealth, whatever it might, greed, irresponsibility, the sacrifice of others for themselves. It has consequences, and we're living in the tail end of a long development in that direction, in a bad direction. So all of that kept in mind. Where do we find ourselves? Well, we find ourselves beholden to an American empire, right? That is, in some ways, it's the culmination of Western civilization. It's where it's led to, and everything is. You may have noticed. I'm sure everyone watching this has noticed. everything is being revealed. Right, the nature of our institutions is being laid bare for us to see. Who and what actually pulls the levers in the world, right? Where political power actually lies, has been exposed for us to see. We collectively, over generations, right, we've all played a part in enabling and cultivating the position we find ourselves in, right? Even when due to polarization, we might think, well, the person in charge isn't the person I voted for. In fact, I hate this person, so it's not my fault. It's the same. It's inescapable that you are behaving in exactly the same way as probably the person in question to some extent, and your perceived enemies on the other side of the same cultural drama. Right. There are a number of wars breaking out around the world. A number of countries are moving into war economies. It seems like this will be the future for a while. The draft is being brought back in a number of countries. You don't need prophetic vision to look at what's happening in the world to understand that if something happened in New York that was an intentional attack, right, that it would serve interests for that to happen, right? What I'm trying to do when I'm saying this stuff, I'm trying to stay apolitical in the sense that I'm not coming at this from a political perspective, and I have no interest in presenting a view that people can latch onto politically, right? So it doesn't matter whether you think I don't know, a specific country might orchestrate an attack in America, right, to get America to do, or the public to back what it is that they want to do in terms of a campaign, right, in terms of war in the world.
False flag,
right.
they call it.
Yes. Or if it really is, an attack by America's enemies.
A flag.
A flag, a true flag,
yeah.
Right? This either way. I mean, who can't see that the situation is such that it's actually not that it's not that hard to believe, is it? In fact, I imagine that there are people who, just looking at geopolitical events, could predict, like something like that is likely to happen. So I don't think that there is, there's not much for me to. I don't think I'm adding much.
With your opinion.
With my opinion, with speculation, with what the details might be. I mean, I could be very particular and say this is a possibility, but I'm not sure I'm not sure what I would add by doing that. But suffice it to say, I think you would have to be, if you were surprised if such a thing happened, right? That would be puzzling, I think, given what's happening in the world.
It's not controversial to say that throughout history, true flags and false flags have occurred, so it's not that controversial to imagine they might occur again. Yeah,
or even the seizing of an opportunity, right? Because it doesn't have to follow that the origin or the nature of an event determines the actions of those people responding to it.
Yeah.
Right. So with the sufficient amount of trauma and death, you can get people to do unspeakable things. Right. If you're skilled at doing that, and it almost doesn't matter what what the origin of the event is.
Right.
You can take advantage of the opportunity, and this is, I mean, taking advantage of opportunities. That's just happening constantly all the time anyway, isn't it? So I think I think that the question around when people talk about this, like a false flag or a true flag or these kinds of things, I think sometimes we can miss what the salient point is, which is either way there is a corruption, that runs through our culture, through our civilization, runs through the world now, doesn't it? Because it's global. And that there is, what can we say? What's the answer to it? What's the answer to it? And the answer is the divine, turning to the divine. That's what the answer is. The answer isn't, getting mad online at I don't know, some person that you'll never meet. Yeah, but I always do. You may have noticed this. I always try my best to pass right on by anything that might be that could be used as a prop in some kind of cultural drama, right? Because it's which doesn't make you any friends, because most people are political and most people do want you to say what they believe to be the right side of a cultural drama. Yeah, so everyone hates you, both sides. But I mean, I will say this. I mean, maybe this sounds like I don't know, has something in common with certain groups online, but it does. At the end of a civilization, or the end of a world and the beginning of another one, things do get revealed, and we do get to see what the truth is. And I think it's astonishing how over the last decade, everything is being exposed for us to see, which is quite an extraordinary thing. And the outcome from that is no one can say that they don't know what where we find ourselves, right, and what the nature of our choices and the fruits that they will lead to, like what their nature is. We're free to still make the same choices that we've always made, right, if we want to do that, but no one can say that they don't know. And there is something about that illumination. That's what the function of a lamp is. That's what the function of waking up is. Human beings who wake up is to do that, is to make the nature of this place conscious. You're still free to make your choices, but you can't say you didn't know what the outcome will be, from any given direction. We can see that, can't we, on the world stage? At least I feel like everyone should be able to see it.
You're speaking of the Bible, which we did earlier. Reminds me of that part of the Beatitudes about the lamp. Jesus says you are the salt and the light. You know that part?
Say more.
Well, he says...
Can you remember more?
I can't. Part about the lamp, he says, you don't put a lamp, and you don't light the lamp and then put it under, the bushel, I think it says.
Yeah.
But you put it on its lamp stand, where it can illuminate. Yeah. And he says that you're like the light, and that to show the Father, I think he says that, you, by your sort of, good works and virtue, etc., your light, illuminate, show the Father to men. That's the idea. Something like that in the Beatitudes, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
So part of the reason I bring that up is to be a little bit provocative, because presumably that's not quite what you're saying, or is it?
I think it's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the you can read that in a particular way, which is if you've said yes to trusting what Jesus trusts. See, he's doing who does he trust? Like, what nature is he turned towards? Right. This is what faith is. If you are doing that, then the outcome from doing that, right, which more broadly speaking might be simply professing what the truth is, what you know to be true, could include, prophetic vision or whatever, right? Being afraid of how your people will respond to you, right? This would be if you decided through timidity, like I'll keep this to myself, and I'm not going to tell people what I know to be true. This has consequences for the world, but that's what it would be to put a light under a bushel or a table, right? Hide it away. No, on the contrary, it's supposed to be visible. It's supposed to be visible, and you should expect your own people to murder you for it. That's that. If there's a theme when it comes to Jesus, or Jesus being, by the way, the third person in Magia, who God is to the soul. I say Jesus because I'm being consistent with the Greek, Ion, Sophia, and Jesus. But if there's a theme, it is to listen to that other voice, which by definition is contrary to the world of appearances, which means that the culture that you live in, which mostly listens to that voice, right, then you're going to be in conflict, right, and that there is this dynamic which is if you decide to listen to appearances and you do decide to sacrifice others for yourself, you by degrees cross the line of your conscience, right? It's always by little bits. Usually, sometimes there's a big leap, but it's usually by little bits. But eventually, you will find yourself, if you do that, in a position where you've done it so much, right, that it is too painful to acknowledge what you've done. It's too painful to acknowledge what you've done. And what you don't want is someone illuminating what you've done. So it's better to try and snuff out the light. It's better to put the light out, right? Because it's too painful to look at what it is that you've done. Now there's a further development to that, which might be actually the sense of revenge against an unjust world is such that the light is perceived as an attack, and there's a more direct malevolent aspect to wanting to extinguish the light, right? But we certainly find examples of both of these today, at large, and with every successive wave that we have of these cultural dramas where people lose their minds, it's come wave after wave after wave. Large sections of the population have indulged things and done things that they crossed the line of their conscience that they otherwise wouldn't have done. Where it's too, it's imperative that it's not admitted what it is that has been done. Again, there are consequences to this. This is all part of the same trajectory of what the type of world that we're incarnating as a collective, as people. Yeah, you see, I'm dodging there. You see, saying particular details, right? But everyone knows who they are and what they've done, and you know it. Everyone knows it, right? You don't need someone to tell you. If you've done it, you've done it.
Oh, I see.
Do you know what I mean? Well, the way that you know is that you've behaved in a certain way, and then you realise after the fact that was hysterical. I did, and I said and did things that up until that point I professed to, champion the opposite virtues, like that. If anything,
sure.
Yeah. A part of that, I mean, repentance doesn't mean it doesn't mean paying for your mistakes, that a toll is required. That's not what it means. What it means is turn around. To say, oh no, I see what I've done, and it's very painful to see what I've done, and I can see the results of it. Okay, well, going forward, I won't do that again. How do I stop myself from doing that again? I need an orientation that will allow me to travel through these cultural dramas without being sucked in, right? Without being possessed and forming part of a drowning herd, right? Like a herd of horses that's possessed, that will eventually it destroys itself. But we've seen waves and waves of them, and I imagine that's only going to intensify in the future. One will most assuredly form after the event that I've described. That will certainly be the case. Yeah, which again, why you need to turn to something that isn't an appearance. You need to turn to something that is real, right? And that's your anchor. And that's how you orient yourself and how you travel through appearances. Without, everyone will fail to a certain extent. Everyone fails to a certain extent with these things. You just don't want to stay there, and you want a way of consciously recognizing, I contracted into that. I got caught by it. I'm going to stop doing that. And the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to delete my social media accounts. That'll be the first thing that I do. And then now I'm going to go and pray.
Is that what happened? What you did?
Why not? Why not? But yeah, I don't use social media, and I do pray. Yeah. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I'm curious about the role of Jesus in Magia, but I think that's probably for another time. So a lot of what you've said,
probably
just with my mind in the Beatitudes, as it was briefly there.
Yeah. A
lot of what you said maps very cleanly onto it. The test, right before the Beatitudes, little bit right before it, he's healing the sick and so on. But then right before that is the temptation.
I mean, my relationship with Jesus, with Jesus, is one part of this. It's just an astonishing surprise to me. Even though I look back on the course of my spiritual experiences and so on, and he's there every step of the way. But when Magia came along, it was through contact with the God Ion. Right? I didn't know anything about this God. Why is this God telling me he's my true God? First of all, what's that about? After Magia came along, then there was the goddess. This was a period of a number of years of travelling through certain kinds of darkness. And it was Sophia. Why is Sophia here? Why is Ion and Sophia? I now know that when Ion first appears in the Old Testament, right, it's the Ancient of Days, Sophia is with him. As soon as they turn up, it's the God and the Goddess, which is an astonishing surprise to me. What was even more of a surprise, however, was when when Jesus turned up and taught me how to pray. This was an even bigger surprise. And when if I share this, people will listen to this story and they will be like, I'm not listening to anything this guy ever says again, because it's too too crazy. Although I've shared crazy things before on this channel, haven't I? So, talking to birds and so on. But I'll tell you what happened, because it is what happened. I happened to have on the TV a video playing about an Orthodox Christian who entered a church, and they were describing their transition to Orthodox Christianity. It was playing in the background. I wasn't paying attention to it really. The story's being told, and this phrase comes up, which is this person talking to themselves, and they say they walked into this church for the first time they've ever been in an Orthodox Christian church, and they suddenly realised that they missed something, right? And then what they realised is that they actually missed a person. It was a person, and then it turns out that was Jesus, right? And this was this person's conversion. When I heard the word person, something pulled my head back and right in this direction. Now, in the room that I was in that direction, was a bookcase. And as one does when something of this nature happens, Because the subtle energetics is something you become familiar with going through the process of waking up, and particularly if you work as a teacher with lots of students, you see lots of examples of this. And indeed it's the origin, this spontaneous phenomenon is the origin for traditions like Kriya Yoga, right? So it's a well-known thing, but nevertheless I still had this, the initial human reaction, which is always there, and it's fine, but we're not going to stay there. And it was, I don't know what that was, but it's probably worth ignoring, right? So I moved my head back, right? But simultaneously I have the thought, something is happening and I should pay attention. So I trusted the other thing instead, right? And I thought, I'll just go with where this feeling of being pulled, I'll just go with it. So my head turned again. And then the pull was for me to stand up. And I'm walking towards this bookcase, and I thought, in my mind, I'm thinking, is this going to be one of those stories where, like, a book falls out, and I'm just on this specific page, and there's a guru there, or I don't know, whatever, right? And I went to the bookcase, but my sight was pulled up past the books on the top shelf, and I reached back, and what I pulled out was an icon, and I was being pulled to the image of Jesus in the icon. And the image is of the Virgin Mother with the Christ child, right? Now, I had this icon because, I don't know if it was previously that year or the year before, I went on holiday to Greece. I happened to go into this old house that was a church, and to support the old lady who ran the place, for tourists or whatever, I just bought an icon. And I bought the icon because I found Mary's face to be pleasant or amusing, right, the way that it was drawn. And I must have, when I got home, I just put it there and then forgot about it. I pulled the icon out, and then my body was moved through, first of all, into prostration, right? But then over a period of successive days, this happened a number of days, my body would be moved through different movements that then became the actions for a prayer. And the prayer is the words that already existed since I first came into contact with Ion, right? Because the basis for the prayer is from the words that he spoke. This was the other component to it, right? So it was ending with this prayer, it was ending where it began with prayer, but now to include this coming together of the mysteries in the image of the cross, right? So in Magia there are three mysteries embodied in a fourth. That fourth one is the mystery of the divine human being, but it has since transpired that these four mysteries come together in a way to form a cross, right, which speaks to the mystery of Jesus or Jesus. This is a surprise to me. On this path, this didn't really happen with Sophia, but it certainly happened at the beginning with Ion. I remember thinking, this God is saying he's my true God, right? I don't know if that's true. My human part is doubting, because entities might tell you, all kinds of stuff, right? And I have a background in magic, and I've dealt with many entities that just want to feed off the interaction. So I had this suspicion and so on. However, what was I trusting? The same thing that I'd always trusted, that led me through awakening, that led me to the God Ion. I'm still following the same thing. I'll continue to trust that. And then over the course of the years, Ion's nature has unfolded in my consciousness, right? Despite my preferences, despite what I thought about it. But I remember, so it's like, what is this and what's unfolding? I don't know what its nature is, and I'm unsure about it. When Jesus comes along, I remember thinking, hang on a moment, right? Yes, I can look at the Magia teaching and I can see a structure in there that has many parallels with what might be found in the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, right? There are parallels there, but there are big differences. And yes, so I could see the idea of sacrificing yourself to yourself, right? Your false self to your true self. lying down to die, to consciously go through that process. That's what awakening is. I can see how there's parallels with the story of Christ consciously dying, sacrificing himself to himself, which is what he does on the cross. I could see that, but explicitly Jesus, like explicitly Jesus, like what is going on, right? Is everything that I've done prior now, was it a mistake? Is it defunct? Right? I'm having these thoughts. Again, this is the stuff that humans do, right? And it's always this spot. It's like, how much experience do you have to have with something that is only ever ideal, right? And is always demonstrates its promise, right? How much of that experience do you have to have before you stop doubting it, or rather indulge doubts, that have a different origin? I think that will probably go on forever as a human being. Not sure you can escape it. You're just not supposed to stay there. You need a way of being conscious of it and then bringing your attention back to what's actually real. But I was thinking, I was having these thoughts. Like, have I just been making a mistake? Should I go and become an Orthodox Christian?
Right.
Like, all of these thoughts are happening, but I'm not trusting appearances. I'm not trusting my best guesses. I don't care about my opinion. I'm trusting something else. So I'm going to allow that to disclose its own nature, and I'll just follow it. And I'll try and do my best not to mess it up. And I didn't know where it was going. I couldn't have guessed that by the end of a certain period of work, everything would tie together in a way where Ion, Sophia and Jesus were always there in the teaching. We're always there with the three mysteries, right, and their embodiment in the fourth mystery. I couldn't have guessed at that, and it's a should anyone be interested, it's a miraculous thing to appreciate. And I'm saying all of this because I'm just finishing writing up an exegesis, or in-depth practice instructions for the Magia text that has been for 7 years. Has it been 7 years? I think the book came in 2019, something like that. You think I'd know the exact date, wouldn't you?
I have it, we can check.
I know it was May the 19th to the 24th. Hopefully. Yes, 6-7 years, whatever. In that time, many practical details, have been cultivated, let's put it that way, like how best to communicate some of these practices, that kind of a thing. Particularly through the order that I founded to transmit the practices, that's informed it. And now I've reached a point where the text can now be officially published, through a formal publisher, as opposed to just publishing it myself, with this exegesis or in-depth practical instructions, so that all you need is the book. Like, you can do all of the practices from the book, if you're a diligent enough student. And all of this stuff that I'm talking about is in there, including the how the mysteries come together in terms of the cross, and how we can understand the divine as three persons to the soul, and all the other practices that go along with it, prayers, incubating practice, all the different kinds of binding practice, working with shadows, how to identify awakenings, all of that stuff. So hopefully that will be coming out next spring.
Good. Well, and I proposed to you we do a sort of series, didn't I?
You did.
Going through the which you sort of agreed tentatively to.
Yeah.
And we might do quite a bit of that in person, seeing as we live quite close to each other. Yeah.
Yes, hopefully in cooler circumstances.
Yes, it's very hot today.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we've done it. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap it up? I mean, we could go on and on now. The threads you're beginning to pull on here, I think, are essentially leading us into that series we've discussed, going through the Magia teachings, perhaps drawing upon this new exegetical work. So I think that would be very interesting. But we're sort of going in that direction now, so I think that's why it makes sense to wrap it up now and do that at that time. Is there anything you want to say by way of conclusion then, if we think of this now as the end?
No.
Okay. Good. In that case, Alan Chapman, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Yeah. Good. All right.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.